Here it is, guys. Today's awesome message. It's all about worry. It'll be great for people like me that worry about stuff sometimes. You may be worrying about something at home. Strap in. It's going to be an awesome message.
Hi, great to be here again with you. It's really good to carry on this conversation about feelings. It was funny when Martin gave me the theme feelings. I naturally went straight back to that song. Not my era and definitely not my genre, but that old song, you know, that goes, and I won't sing it to you because that would hurt, but that song that goes, feelings, you know, nothing but feelings. And then it says, oh, my life of feelings. And there's a truth there because, you know, your life is filled with feelings, or if you like, emotions. We are an emotive people. It's what sets us apart from any other animal or creation, is the mixture and the way that we actually express those emotions. And the truth of the matter is that you have them from the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to bed at night. And some people will actually even take them to bed with them. Feelings, they affect you. The feelings can impact who you are and what you do, and they can impact your life. In fact, feelings are an important part of who we are because we were created with them for the sake of healing. But unfortunately, quite often, and you've probably heard that old phrase, you're a bit of a person that might live out of their feelings. You've seen them around. People that are happy one minute and next minute they're bubbling mess, or they look out if they get angry because they really express and have no holdback of how they're feeling at the time. Or then you have the other person that actually bottles them all down and hides their feelings, and they just flatline. You want to tap them on the shoulder and say, hello, is anyone home? Are you really here, or are you just somewhere else? Feelings are also, I discovered that quite often that negative behaviors can come out of our negative feelings. So a person that's had a really tough life, maybe they've been through a traumatic situation, maybe had a bad upbringing, and they don't feel good. Well, quite often, and it's not unusual, we'll try and find something to make them feel good. It might be a addictive behavior, it could be alcohol, it could be just shopping, it could be work, but we're looking for something to give us that feel good because we want to have that feeling of feeling good. But you know, feelings are something not only are we created with, but you'll find them right back in the beginning. If you looked at the Bible and went right back to creation, I mean, the first man was made, and the first thing we found out that he was alone. He had that feeling of loneliness. And then later on, of course, God made him a partner. He thought that was pretty good, and I reckon he was pretty happy. Then they go to a tree, it says, and they were at the tree and they're having this conversation with the devil, and it says that they probably were pretty confused at that time and had feelings of confusions, and that feeling ended up causing them to do the very thing they were told not to do. Then we see them moving along, come to meet God, and they're carrying that feeling of guilt and the feelings of shame. You see, right through life, you'll see these feelings coming up and these emotions all the time. And we know that God actually has emotions. Did you know that? We see in the scripture, he grieves, he is sad, he gets angry, he is joyful, he has peace, and he passes those things on to us as well. So being made in his image, of course, we're going to have these feelings. And feelings aren't bad, but if they're not under control, they can be bad for us. And so we want to talk about, and I know Mark has been going through the whole idea of feelings. What do we do with our feelings? How can we actually do good with some of our feelings? I want to have a look at one that you may be feeling right now, or if you haven't, like me, I just had one situation just a few minutes ago, and that's the feeling of worry. Yep, worry. I love that. I never worked out what it meant, but there was people used to say, "Oh, you're just a worry wart." Well, I'm not sure what a worry wart is, but worry is something that just sucks our joy. It's a joy killer. When we have someone around us who is full of worry and they come into the house and they're panicking because they're worried about this and they're worried about that, it's sort of like just sucks the joy out of the room. Or sometimes even ourselves, our life becomes joyless because worry just destroys it all because we're focused on what might happen that isn't happened yet. But there's another little saying that we would say quite often is, "I'm worried sick." And yet it's true. Worry can actually create sickness. It actually can make us feel sick because you get those butterflies and that stomach cramps because you're just worried so much. If you worry all the time, then yes, there's a mental sickness that comes in that where we end up getting anxious and panic attacks. And so worry has the ability, this emotion and this feeling has the ability to take us into places that probably aren't healthy for us. Listen, I'm a parent and I had 4 teenage boys. So let me tell you, I know what worry is. I know what it's like to sit home at night waiting for them to turn up. And I stay up all night waiting for them to come, and your brain starts to take over and this little treadmill in your head takes off and I wonder what's happened. Why are they late? What are they doing? Have they been in a car accident? Has this happened? And it starts to build to the place where I wonder if aliens have taken them. Am I going to have to go to the hospital and visit them in a minute? And your mind just takes over where this worry builds up. And I remember one time I was so worried, panicking. I went out to go and see if I could find my son, only to find out that he was actually already in bed asleep and I didn't need to be worried. But worry is an interesting thing because it's good to be concerned. And we should be concerned. We should be concerned about the things that are happening around us. We should be concerned about our children, and loving them is actually having a concern for them. But you see, when concern gets to a place where it starts to grow into worry and then starts to create fear, all of a sudden this starts to dominate and control not only our life, but those around us. And it changes our demeanor, it changes the way that we look, it changes the way that we see things. So worry, how can we actually look at and deal and move out of this worry? I love the story of Corrie ten Boom. She's a beautiful lady. She was a Dutch lady. She was there in the war, the Second World War, and her family, watchmakers, protected the Jewish people because they believed that they were God's special people. So they would hide them in their houses until the Gestapo came along and found them, and her father and her sister were all put into a concentration camp. Corrie ten Boom, you can imagine, in this concentration camp, it was a pretty tough time. Her sister died while she was in there, and later on when she was released, it was only within a couple of days, all the people that she cared for and loved in that concentration camp were put into a gas chamber. So you could imagine what this lady carries. And she makes this beautiful quote in her book where she wrote a book called The Clippings from My Notebook. And she puts this in there. She says, worry is carrying tomorrow's load with today's strength. Carrying 2 days at once. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? She goes on to say, it is moving into tomorrow ahead of time. Worry doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It empties today of its strength. What a great thought. You see, worry is trying to control a future that you probably may not even have a control over. So worry never fixes tomorrow, but always ruins today. So I want to suggest to you that maybe we could replace worry with something else. Maybe we could not let worry be the thing that determines who we are, but we could turn that around. And to help us do that, I want to go to, in the Bible, there's a story of a guy called Elisha and his servants. And it goes right back to ancient history, to a time when Israel was being attacked by the Syrians. And the Syrian king from Aram was setting up these strategic attacks on the city. And every time he came up with this idea, there was this prophet in Israel that would go to their king, and he would get a message from God with the exact strategy that the enemy was going to bring onto Israel. So he would go to them and he would tell the king, this is what's going to happen. This is the town that they're going to attack tomorrow. So the king at the time would get his troops and they would go and protect that city. Well, the king from Aram was so upset about this. Every time he made an attack, the opposition already knew the answer. So he said, who is the traitor? Who is the person that's taking these secret messages and telling the opposition what's going to happen? Someone found out that it was this prophet called Elisha, who lived at a place called Dothan. And so the king of Aram said, that's it. I'm going to go and we're going to take this man out. So he sends the army, his whole army goes down to actually take out Elisha because he keeps giving the plans to the king of Israel. And we pick it up in a book called 2 Kings, chapter 6, verse 15. Old Testament, if you've got an app, if you can open up the scripture, it'd be great to have a look at it because it's a great story. And I'm reading it from the New Living Translation. It goes like this. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. His servant, he gets up in the morning. You can imagine, still getting the sleep out of his eyes. He goes outside, and what does he see? He opens the door, and there is a whole army surrounding them. A whole army that's going to oppose him. There is no way out. He is stuck. There is army there. There's just him with maybe a club and a preacher. And don't rely on a preacher to help you against a fight. So he's in this house. He opens the door. He sees it surrounded. No possibilities. No answers. No iPhone to ring up and get back up. Nothing to... He's there with the problems right at his doorstep. The doorstep that sometimes we might get up at in the day and we find that, man, we've got this world of problems right at our doorstep. We've got this opposition at my doorstep of life. We've got people that want to take me out. There's people that might want to overpower you. Or maybe there's the opposition of the bank account that's sinking down to nothing and you're not sure how you're going to pay the next bill. Or maybe it's the opposition at work and you're going to work and you're afraid that you might actually lose your job. Or maybe there's that army that's attacking you in your family right now and it's sort of like it's just too much and I just can't see this tension that I'm feeling in my family, my worry of my children, my worry of what's going to happen, the relationship with my spouse. It just feels like there's no answer. And the servant felt that. As he went outside, the worries of life were too big for him to be able to do anything with. And you and I have been there. It's crippling him. He felt hopeless. He was crippled. He was disempowered. And then it goes on to the next part of this verse. And I look at that and I go, so what do we do when you are stuck in a situation like that? And I love it because then he says, I go back to the verse, "Oh no, my Lord, what shall we do?" The servant asks a simple question. What shall we do? Think about that. What shall we do? The reason why that question is so important is that we need to only do the things that we can do. Quite often when we've got these tensions and these things that go round in our head and take away our joy and tie us up in knots, is because we're trying to answer questions and try and solve in problems that we have no control over. You know, when you've got somebody who's opposing you or causing tension in your life, you know what? You can't change them. You can't cause them to do the things that you think they should do. You have no control over that. But we might worry about that. And yet the great answer of this particular servant was to look at what's the action I can do right now. What is the key to it is to do the things that only you can do, not anybody else. And you focus on what I can do. A good little exercise sometimes when we are struggling with issues that we see no solutions to is to get a piece of paper, to write down a list of all the things that I'm in control of and all the things that I have no control of. And then you take the things that I have no control of and you move them to one side, and then you just look at the list of things that you have control of and you respond to the things that you can control. You put your attention, you put your mind, you put your energy, you put your emotions onto the things that you can do. What can we do is an important question, very important for us to look at. And it takes us from that place of no longer being bound up by the things I have no control of. But then he goes on to say, from Elisha's response to that was, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." See, Elisha then says to this servant, after the servant says, "What can we do?" Elisha prays this prayer, "God, open his eyes." I like that concept because you see, at the moment, the servant is looking through his eyes. See, he wasn't blind. He could see. He could see exactly what was going on. He knew what was happening. But Elisha asked God to open his eyes. In other words, to get a different perspective, to look at things from a different worldview. To look at things from a God worldview rather than from my limited resources worldview. To look at it that when I see things with eyes or spectacles of God, life looks very, very different. And sometimes we just need to step back and take a God view. You see, someone said, are you worried about COVID, Steve? I said, well, actually, not really, because you see, with God, if I live, I'm with God, and if I die, I'm with God, and God's in control. So when I look at it from a God point of view, he is bigger than all of that. He holds the future, he holds my past, he holds eternity. I'm actually okay if I stand alongside God and look at the issues that I face from a God point of view. I have a rock up in the hills that I call my vision rock. in Kalamunda, we're looking down on the city of Perth, and so there's a Lion's Lookout, and I walk about a kilometre into the bush, and there's a rock that looks over the city from probably about 25 k's out. And you know, the city looks very different when you're standing up high, looking down from a big distance. It looks so different. The world looks different. And sometimes we need to take a step back and to look out from God's perspective and not from our perspective. And you see things very different. There's a guy called Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he makes this comment. He says, sorrow looks back, worry looks around, but faith looks up. Friend of mine in WA here, you may have seen the news of this girl that's lost up in Carnarvon, Cleo. And a town of 4,000 people in Carnarvon are worried. And it seems pretty hard at the moment. And so my pastor friend Brendan from the Church of Christ up there decided to have, didn't know, was helping out and talking with people, but decided to run a prayer vigil. People came from everywhere to come into the church building. Those that, some of them who might believe in a God or not sure about him, but just wanted to find a space. And they would come in. Interesting, they were asked by the media and people wanted to zoom in from all over the place. And Brendan said, no, this is a sacred place. Because you see, we need a space to go, to sit and maybe reflect on the things that worry us in life and look at it from a different perspective. To find a place where we can see with a God set of glasses rather than a man's set of glasses. Instead of sizing up our problems with our size frame, actually make our problems into a God-shaped problem, which is much, much bigger. And he has the answer. And that's why he said, worry about nothing, but seek first my kingdom. In other words, come to my kingdom. Don't worry about it, but look from a different perspective. But then he goes on a little bit further. And so as he opens his eyes, it then says, he looked and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. You see, the servant saw more than a small army. He saw a massive army. All of a sudden, he could see differently. He could see the possibilities. He could see that there was a God who was bigger than this king's army that was now in control. His worries started to disappear into the armies of God because he could see that the victory was already in God's hands. See, God is in the business of giving us things that we can't handle so that we can give him the things we can't handle so he can handle them. It is an amazing thought, isn't it? But quite often when we're in those places where we go, wow, I just don't know what to do with this. And God says, good, now give it to me. And let me show you what I can do with it. See, God said there is nothing that's too big for him because he's a big God. See, here is the truth. God has it in his hands. He can do all things. Philippians 4 in the Message says this. It says, don't fret or worry. Instead of worrying, pray. Let petitions and praise shape your worries into prayers, letting God know your concerns. Well, do you like that description of Eugene Peterson? It says, let your petitions and praise shape your worries into prayers. What if we took our worries and we shaped them into a prayer and we let God take those concerns? It was Rick Warren in his book, The Purpose of Christmas, and he wrote, the more you pray, the less you'll panic. The more you worship, the less you'll worry. You'll feel more patient and less pressure. You see, the concept of taking worry and replacing it with worship is really when we say we take those things I'm out of control of and I'll put those into the hands of a God who I will worship. And I want to encourage you today. If there are things in a society where worry is really there's lots of things to worry about. Just watch the news. You'll get a head full of worry. But in a season in society where there is so many unknowns, can I encourage you? Think about the story of the servant and Elisha. Think about that. Think about, well, what are the things I can do right now? What are the things that I am in control of? Change your perspective and look at a perspective from a God's perspective. And then you watch him do only the things that he can do. Do the things that only God can do and change the circumstance. And it says that the peace of God will rule in your heart. And that's what he wants to do for you today. I mean, if you don't know this God that we talk about, and I encourage you, step into that place because there is a God that's bigger than your worries. And he only wants you to live in today because he'll take control and he'll look after the future.